The crack of a whip silenced the rowdy crowd gathered in White Oaks, New Mexico Territory, 1878, where the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift auction platform. Quinn Vance watched from beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, his eyes never leaving the woman who stood with her chin raised despite the chains binding her wrists. Her name, he'd learned, was Lillian Hayes, and though her dress was tattered and her face smudged with dirt, there was a defiance in her eyes that the past 3 days in Sheriff Dunn's jail hadn't managed to extinguish. "Next up, this fine woman here," bellowed the auctioneer, a paunchy man with tobacco-stained teeth. "Caught stealin' from the general store, sheriff's giving her a chance to work off her debt through servitude instead of rotting in prison. Bidding starts at $15. The crowd jeered, hurling crude remarks that made Quinn's jaw tighten. He'd been passing through White Oaks on his way to Santa Fe when he'd witnessed her arrest. He knew what they were calling theft was her desperate attempt to secure medicine for her sick brother. A brother who, according to town gossip, had passed away yesterday while she sat behind bars. $20, called a voice from the crowd. $25, shouted another. Quinn watched as Lillian's expression remained stoic, though he caught the slight tremble of her lower lip. The bidders were primarily owners of saloons and brothels, their intentions for a beautiful woman like Lillian transparent in their leering smiles. $50, yelled a burly man Quinn recognized as the owner of the Silver Spur, a notoriously rough establishment on the edge of town. The auctioneer grinned. "I have 50, do I hear 60? Quinn pushed off from the hitching post where he'd been leaning. His spurs clinked softly as he strode forward. The crowd parted before him, whispers following in his wake. He was a stranger in town, but his reputation had preceded him. Quinn Vance, former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, known for his deadly accuracy with a Colt and his unwavering sense of justice. $100, Quinn said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the suddenly hushed square. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $100 for the thief, going once. $150, challenged the Silver Spur's owner, his face reddening. Quinn's hand moved to rest casually on his holster. $300. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even Lillian's carefully composed expression faltered, her eyes widening as they met Quinn's for the first time. $300. The auctioneer was practically salivating. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat. As Quinn approached the platform to pay, the crowd's jeers grew louder, disappointed by the loss of their afternoon's entertainment. Some made crude suggestions about what he planned to do with his purchase, while others warned him to watch his back around a thief. Quinn ignored them all. He counted out the money silently, never taking his eyes off Lillian, who watched him with a mixture of wariness and confusion. The sheriff stepped forward with a key to unlock her shackles. "She's all yours, mister, though I can't imagine what a man like you wants with trouble like her." "Not your concern," Quinn replied, his tone brooking no argument. As the chains fell away from her wrists, Lillian rubbed at the raw skin. "Why?" she asked quietly, speaking directly to Quinn for the first time. Quinn didn't answer. Instead, he removed his long duster coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, shielding her from the prying eyes of the crowd. Without a word, he guided her toward the hitching post where his stallion, Thunder, waited patiently. "Where are you taking me?" Lillian asked, her voice stronger now, though still barely above a whisper. Quinn finally looked down at her, his expression softening just slightly. "Wherever you want to go, Miss Hayes. I didn't buy you, I bought your freedom." Lillian stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. "That's not how this works. You paid for me, I'm your—" She swallowed hard. "Property now." "No, madam," Quinn said firmly. "That's not how I work." He untied Thunder's reins and offered her a hand. "But it's getting late, and this town doesn't seem too friendly to either of us at the moment. I suggest we find someplace safer to discuss your options." Lillian hesitated, studying his face as if searching for some hidden motive. The crowd had begun to disperse, but many eyes still watched them with interest or hostility. "My brother," she said suddenly. "I need to see him first." A shadow passed over Quinn's face. Miss Hayes, I heard about your brother. I'm truly sorry. Lillian's composure cracked then, her eyes filling with tears. No, she whispered. No, they wouldn't even let me. I'll take you to him, Quinn promised, and then we'll get you out of this town. Lillian looked up at the tall, mysterious man who had just spent a small fortune to free a woman he didn't know. Against her better judgment, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her onto his horse. As they rode away from the auction square, the whispers and jeers faded behind them. Quinn Vance had no idea why he'd done what he did. He'd come to White Oaks tracking a bounty, not looking to rescue a woman in distress. Yet something about Lillian Hayes's quiet dignity in the face of humiliation had stirred something in him, something he'd thought long dead after years of hunting men for money. What he did know was that the road ahead would be dangerous. The man he was hunting was still out there, and now he had someone else to protect. But as thunder carried them toward the small church where Lillian's brother awaited burial, Quinn found himself strangely at peace with his impulsive decision. The small church on the outskirts of White Oaks stood silhouetted against the fading light of day. Quinn tethered Thunder to a post and helped Lillian down, noting how she clutched his coat tightly around herself despite the evening's warmth. "The preacher's a good man," Quinn said softly. "He'll have taken care of your brother properly." Lillian nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. As they approached the church door, an elderly man in a clerical collar stepped out to meet them. "Miss Hayes," he greeted, his kind eyes taking in her disheveled appearance and then flickering to Quinn with a question in them. "This is Mr. Vance," Lillian said. "He helped me." The words seemed inadequate for what Quinn had done, but they were all she could manage. "I've come to see Luke." The preacher nodded. "Of course, I've prepared him in the back room. You can have all the time you need." Quinn removed his hat as they entered the simple wooden church. "Would you prefer privacy, Miss Hayes?" Lillian hesitated, then shook her head. "Please stay." The back room was small and dimly lit by candles. On a simple table lay the body of Luke Hayes, cleaned and dressed in what appeared to be borrowed clothes. He couldn't have been more than 20, and the resemblance to his sister was striking, the same golden brown hair, the same delicate features. Lillian moved forward as if in a trance, reaching out to touch her brother's cold hand. "I tried, Luke," she whispered. "I tried to get the medicine." Quinn remained by the door, giving her space while keeping watch. The town had been hostile enough that he wasn't taking chances. "How will I bury him?" Lillian asked suddenly, turning to Quinn. "I have nothing. They took everything when they arrested me." Before Quinn could respond, the preacher spoke from the doorway. "Don't worry about that, my child. The burial's been arranged for tomorrow morning." "A plot in the cemetery has been donated." "By whom?" Lillian asked, surprised. The preacher glanced at Quinn. "The gentleman came by yesterday, didn't give a name, just paid for everything and left instructions for a proper burial." Quinn shifted uncomfortably under Lillian's questioning gaze. "You arranged this?" she asked. "It seemed the right thing to do," he replied simply. Lillian turned back to her brother, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. They stayed with Luke until the last light of day had faded completely. Quinn watched as Lillian whispered her final goodbyes, placing a gentle kiss on her brother's forehead before stepping back. "I'm ready now," she said, straightening her shoulders. The preacher assured them he would see to all the arrangements for the morning. As they stepped back into the night, Quinn noticed how exhausted Lillian looked, swaying slightly on her feet. "There's an inn on the other side of town," he said. "You need rest." Lillian looked up at him warily. "And then what happens, Mr. Vance?" "What do you expect from me for what you've done?" Quinn's expression remained impassive, but his voice softened. "I expect nothing, Miss Hayes. Tomorrow, after the burial, you can go wherever you choose. I'll provide you with enough money to start over somewhere new." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Her question held genuine bewilderment. Quinn helped her mount Thunder before swinging up behind her. "Perhaps I'm tired of seeing good people suffer while the wicked prosper," he said quietly. "Or perhaps I just didn't like the look of the men bidding on you." As they rode toward the inn, Quinn was acutely aware of Lillian's back pressed against his chest, of the faint scent of lavender that somehow lingered beneath the jail's mustiness. It had been a long time since he'd been this close to another person, especially a woman. His life as a bounty hunter was solitary by necessity. The town was quieter now, though several saloons spilled light and raucous noise into the street. Quinn kept his head down as they passed, hoping to avoid recognition. The man he was tracking, Amos Fletcher, had friends in town, and Quinn's actions at the auction had drawn unwanted attention. The innkeeper looked suspiciously at them when they entered a respectable establishment, didn't often welcome a woman who'd just been sold at auction, even with a formidable escort like Quinn. But money spoke louder than morality in frontier towns, and soon Lillian had a room of her own, with Quinn taking an adjacent one. "Try to get some sleep," Quinn told her as they stood in the hallway between their rooms. "Tomorrow will be difficult enough." Lillian looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Mr. Vance, I don't know how to thank you, Quinn," he corrected gently, "and there's no need for thanks." A small smile touched her lips. "Lillian, then," she hesitated. "Quinn, I don't know anything about you." "Not much to know," he replied. "Former Texas Ranger. Now I hunt men with bounties on their heads." He saw no reason to hide what he was. Her eyes widened slightly. "Is that why you're in White Oaks?" Quinn nodded. "Looking for a man called Amos Fletcher. Killed 2 people during a bank robbery in Mesilla. And instead you got saddled with me," Lillian said, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. "I make my own choices, Miss Hayes." "Lillian," Quinn corrected himself. "Now get some rest, lock your door." As he turned toward his own room, Lillian called after him softly. "Quinn, thank you for believing I'm worth saving." Those words followed Quinn into his dreams that night, echoing in his mind as he tossed and turned, haunted by memories of those he hadn't been able to save in the past. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the thin curtains of Quinn's room. He dressed quickly, checking his weapons out of habit. The burial was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and he wanted to scout the cemetery before taking Lillian there. Amos Fletcher was still his mission, and he couldn't afford to drop his guard. A gentle knock on his door announced Lillian. When he opened it, he was momentarily taken aback. The innkeeper's wife had clearly taken pity on her. She wore a simple but clean black dress, her hair washed and neatly arranged. Even in mourning attire, with grief etched across her features, she was strikingly beautiful. "The innkeeper's wife loaned me the dress," Lillian explained, noticing his surprise. "For the funeral." They walked to the cemetery in silence, the morning air crisp with the promise of autumn. Quinn remained vigilant, one hand never straying far from his holster. But White Oaks seemed subdued today, as if the town itself respected their mission of grief. To Quinn's surprise, a small gathering awaited them at the cemetery. The preacher stood beside a freshly dug grave, and nearby were several townspeople Quinn didn't recognize. As they approached, an elderly woman stepped forward. "Miss Hayes," she said gently, "I'm Martha Wilson. Your brother worked for my husband at the livery stable. He was a fine young man." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "Thank you for coming," she managed. Others approached a young couple who had been neighbors to the Hayes siblings. The doctor who had treated Luke in his final days, even the general store owner's wife, who squeezed Lillian's hand and whispered an apology. "I didn't know," Lillian whispered to Quinn as they took their places beside the grave. "I didn't know people cared. Small towns have long memories for grudges," Quinn replied softly, "but also for kindness." The service was simple but dignified. The preacher spoke of Luke's gentle spirit and hard work, of his devotion to his sister after their parents' death from influenza 2 years prior. Several others shared brief memories, how Luke had helped deliver a foal in the middle of a thunderstorm, how he'd read to the blacksmith's children when they were ill. When it came time for Lillian to speak, she stepped forward with trembling legs but a strong voice. "My brother believed in the goodness of people," she said. "Even when life gave us reason to doubt, I lost sight of that faith when I was desperate to save him. But standing here today, seeing all of you who knew and valued him, I'm reminded that he was right." Her eyes found Quinn's as she spoke the last words. And something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits, who had both seen too much of the world's darkness. As the service concluded and Luke's simple coffin was lowered into the earth, Quinn noticed a figure watching from a distance, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. His hand instinctively moved toward his gun before he caught himself. This wasn't the time or place for a confrontation, even if the observer was Amos Fletcher. The mourners gradually dispersed, many stopping to offer condolences to Lillian. Quinn kept his distance, not wanting to intrude on these connections to her former life. But he remained watchful, especially of the figure by the oak tree who had yet to move. Finally, only Quinn, Lillian, and the preacher remained at the graveside. As the preacher excused himself with a promise to check on them later, the figure by the oak tree finally approached. Quinn tensed, his hand hovering near his holster, but relaxed slightly when he saw it was a woman. Elderly, wearing clothes that had once been fine but were now worn with age and wear. "Miss Hayes," the woman said, her voice carrying the refined accent of the East. "I'm Adelaide Thornton." Lillian looked confused. "Mrs. Thornton, I don't believe we've met." "No, we haven't," the woman agreed. "But I knew your mother. Many years ago, before she married your father and moved west." Lillian's eyes widened. "You knew my mother?" Adelaide nodded. "We grew up together in Boston." "I lost track of her after she married, but when I moved to New Mexico last year to live with my son, I heard rumors of a Hayes family with a daughter named Lillian, your mother's middle name. I meant to seek you out, but—" She trailed off, glancing at the fresh grave. "Please," Lillian said, "I'd love to hear about my mother. We lost her so young." Adelaide smiled sadly. "I'd be honored. Perhaps you could call on me tomorrow. My son's ranch is just north of town." As the women exchanged details, Quinn kept his distance but remained alert. Something about this coincidence felt too convenient, though the elderly woman seemed genuine enough. When Adelaide finally departed, Lillian returned to Quinn's side, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "My mother never spoke much of her past," she said. "To think there's someone here who knew her." Quinn nodded, understanding the pull of family connections. "What will you do now, Lillian?" She looked up at him, uncertainty in her eyes. "You said you would help me leave town, start somewhere new. Is that offer still open?" "Of course," Quinn replied. "But if you have connections here, people who care about you," he gestured toward where the mourners had stood. "Perhaps staying is an option too." Lillian shook her head. "After the auction, after being in that jail, I don't think I can rebuild a life here." She hesitated. "But I would like to speak with Mrs. Thornton before I leave. She might be my only link to my mother's past." Quinn understood. The dead held powerful sway over the living. He knew that better than most. "We'll stay until tomorrow then. You can visit Mrs. Thornton and I'll make arrangements for your departure." What Quinn didn't say was that staying another day served his purposes too. Amos Fletcher was still in White Oaks, and Quinn intended to complete the job he came for, but he'd need to be careful. His actions at the auction had drawn attention, and Fletcher might know he was being hunted. As they walked back toward town, Quinn found himself studying Lillian's profile. In just one day, she had endured more than most people faced in years: jail, public auction, her brother's funeral, and now this unexpected connection to her past. Yet she walked with her head high, her grief contained but not hidden. "You're staring, Mr. Vance," Lillian said quietly without looking at him. Quinn quickly averted his gaze. "Apologies, I was just thinking you've shown remarkable strength through all of this." A sad smile touched her lips. "Not strength, necessity. When there's no choice but to endure, you endure." "Not everyone does," Quinn replied. "Some break, and you?" she asked, glancing up at him. "What's your story, Quinn Vance? What made a Texas Ranger turn bounty hunter?" Quinn's expression darkened. "That's a tale too long and bitter for a day already heavy with sorrow." Lillian didn't press, but as they continued toward the inn, she said softly, "Sometimes sharing burdens makes them lighter, not heavier." Quinn made no reply, but her words settled uncomfortably in his chest. It had been years since he'd shared anything of himself with another person. His life as a bounty hunter was solitary by design, less complicated, less painful that way. Back at the inn, Quinn arranged for a bath to be brought to Lillian's room and ordered a hot meal sent up. Rest, he told her. I have business to attend to in town. Your bounty, she asked. Quinn nodded. I'll be careful, lock your door. As he turned to leave, Lillian caught his arm. Her touch was light, but it sent an unexpected jolt through him. Quinn, she said earnestly, thank you. Not just for yesterday, but for today, for standing beside me when I had no one else. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Quinn found himself unable to look away from the depth of emotion in her gaze. Then he gently removed her hand from his arm. Rest, Lillian, I'll return before nightfall. The saloons of White Oaks were doing brisk business even in the early afternoon. Quinn visited each methodically, nursing a single whiskey while listening to conversations around him. In the third establishment, a dingy place called the Rusty Nail, he finally heard what he was listening for. Fletcher's getting nervous, a heavy-set man muttered to his companion. Says there's a bounty hunter in town looking for him. He's sure about that, his friend asked skeptically, recognized him from a wanted poster in El Paso, some ex-ranger named Vance. Quinn kept his expression neutral as he sipped his whiskey, so Fletcher knew he was being hunted. That complicated matters. Where's Fletcher holed up now? The second man asked. Thornton Ranch, I reckon. Old Lady's son has always had a soft spot for Amos, ever since they rode with Simmons' gang years back. Quinn set his glass down carefully, his mind racing. The Thornton Ranch where Lillian was planning to visit tomorrow. This couldn't be coincidence. He left the saloon without drawing attention, his stride purposeful as he headed back toward the inn. Adelaide Thornton had seemed genuinely connected to Lillian's mother, but her son was harboring the very man Quinn was hunting, a man who now knew Quinn was after him. Was Lillian being used as bait? Had news of Quinn's actions at the auction reached Fletcher, giving him an opportunity to set a trap? Quinn's pace quickened. He needed to get to Lillian before anyone else did. The inn was quiet when Quinn returned, most guests out about their business in town. He took the stairs 2 at a time, rapping sharply on Lillian's door. Who is it? Her voice called cautiously. Quinn. He heard the lock turn, and then she stood before him, hair damp from her bath, wearing the same black dress but looking refreshed despite the circumstances. Her expression changed immediately when she saw his face. What's wrong? Quinn stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Mrs. Thornton's son is harboring Amos Fletcher at their ranch. Lillian stared at him. The man you're hunting, but that can't be Mrs. Thornton seemed so genuine about knowing my mother. She might well have, Quinn acknowledged, but her son runs with a different crowd, and now Fletcher knows I'm looking for him. Understanding dawned in Lillian's eyes, and he knows about me, about what you did at the auction. Quinn nodded grimly. Going to that ranch tomorrow would be walking into a trap. Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed. So what do? We leave tonight, Quinn decided. As soon as it's dark. There's a stage to Santa Fe at first light from Junction City, 10 miles north. We can be there before dawn. Lillian nodded slowly, processing this change in plans. What about Fletcher? Isn't capturing him your job? Not at the risk of your safety, Quinn said firmly. But it's what you came here to do, Lillian pressed. And now you're abandoning it because of me. Quinn's expression softened slightly. There will be other opportunities to catch Fletcher. Right now, getting you safely away from White Oaks takes priority. Lillian studied his face for a long moment. Why? Why does my safety matter so much to a man who barely knows me? It was a fair question, one Quinn had been asking himself since the moment he'd stepped forward at that auction. He turned away, moving to the window to scan the street below. Pack whatever you need, he said, avoiding her question. We leave at nightfall, but Lillian wasn't so easily deterred. She rose and came to stand beside him at the window. Quinn, she said softly, look at me. Reluctantly, he turned to face her. They were standing closer than he'd realized, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. Why did you really buy my freedom yesterday? She asked. Quinn was a man unaccustomed to revealing his thoughts, but something about her direct gaze made evasion impossible. Because when I looked at you standing on that platform, I saw someone who refused to be broken by circumstance. Someone fighting to survive in a world determined to crush her. He paused. Someone like me, Lillian's expression softened. And now, why risk your bounty to help me escape? Quinn's jaw tightened. Because I've seen too many innocent people caught in the crossfire of vengeance. I won't add you to that list, understanding dawned in Lillian's eyes. That's why you left the Rangers, isn't it? Someone innocent got hurt. Quinn turned back to the window, his shoulders tense. My wife and daughter, he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. 5 years ago. A man I'd arrested escaped custody, came looking for revenge while I was away. Quinn, I'm so sorry, Lillian whispered, placing a gentle hand on his arm. I tracked him for 3 months, Quinn continued, his voice flat. When I found him, I didn't bring him in. After that, I couldn't wear the badge anymore. Lillian didn't withdraw her hand, her touch anchoring him as memories threatened to pull him under. And now you hunt men for money instead of justice. Justice is a luxury few can afford, Quinn replied bitterly. I don't believe you think that, Lillian said. A man who believes only in money wouldn't have stood up at that auction. Before Quinn could respond, a commotion from the street below caught their attention. He moved closer to the window, keeping partially hidden behind the curtain. A group of men had gathered outside the inn, and at their center stood Sheriff Dunn. They're looking for us, Quinn said grimly. We need to leave now, not wait for nightfall. Lillian nodded, quickly gathering the few possessions she had. How will we get past them? Quinn checked his revolvers, ensuring both were fully loaded. Backstairs. I noticed them when we arrived. They lead to the alley behind the inn. As they prepared to leave, a sharp knock sounded on the door. Miss Hayes, Sheriff Dunn here, need to have a word. Quinn silently motioned for Lillian to remain quiet as he moved to position himself beside the door, gun drawn. Miss Hayes, I know you're in there. Open up now or I'll be forced to break down this door. Lillian looked at Quinn, fear evident in her eyes. He nodded once, indicating she should respond. Just a moment, Sheriff, she called, her voice remarkably steady. I'm not properly dressed. Quinn gestured toward the window, then the door, silently communicating his plan. Lillian nodded in understanding. You've got 1 minute, Miss Hayes, then we're coming in, the sheriff called. Quinn holstered his gun and moved swiftly to the window, opening it as quietly as possible. He checked the drop 2 stories, but there was an awning over the back entrance that would break their fall. Ready. He mouthed to Lillian. She nodded, though fear was written clearly across her face. Miss Hayes. The sheriff's voice was impatient now. Time's up. Quinn helped Lillian through the window first, holding her steady as she perched on the sill. Aim for the center of the awning, he instructed quietly. Roll when you hit it. With one last look at him, Lillian pushed off from the window. Quinn watched as she landed on the awning with a muffled thump, then rolled and slid off the edge to the ground below. She looked up at him and nodded she was unhurt. The door behind Quinn splintered as the sheriff began forcing it open. Without hesitation, Quinn swung himself through the window just as the door crashed inward. He heard shouts as he landed on the awning, the fabric tearing slightly under his weight, then dropped to the ground beside Lillian. Run, he commanded, taking her hand. They sprinted down the alley as shouts erupted from the window above. Quinn led Lillian through a maze of back streets, drawing on the mental map he'd made of white oaks during his days searching for Fletcher. Where are we going? Lillian gasped as they ran. Livery stable, Quinn replied tersely. Need to get Thunder. They slowed as they approached the stable, Quinn motioning for Lillian to wait in the shadows while he scouted ahead. The livery looked quiet, but he wasn't taking chances. Drawing his revolver, he approached cautiously. The stable boy, a youngster of about 16, looked up in surprise as Quinn entered. Sir, I need my horse, Quinn said. The black stallion I brought in yesterday. The boy hesitated. Sheriff was here earlier asking about you, said nobody should give you your horse. Quinn leveled his gaze at the boy. That horse is my property. The sheriff has no right to keep him from me. I know that, sir, the boy said, lowering his voice. And I know what you did for Miss Hayes. My pa says it was the decent thing standing up for her like that. Relief washed over Quinn. Then you'll help us, the boy nodded. Your horse is in the back stall. I'll saddle him for you. No time, Quinn said. Just bring him out, and we'll need another mount for Miss Hayes. The boy glanced toward the door. Sheriff took all the other horses, figuring you'd need one, but... He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. My pa's mare is in the last stall. She's not fancy, but she's steady and has good endurance. Your father won't mind, he'll understand, the boy said firmly. Wait here. Minutes later, the boy returned leading both Thunder and a sturdy chestnut mare. Quinn quickly checked Thunder's tack, then turned to the boy. What's your name, son? Thomas, sir, Thomas Wilson. Quinn's eyebrows rose in recognition. Any relation to Martha Wilson? My grandmother, Thomas confirmed. She spoke highly of Luke Hayes, said he was a hard worker, always kind to the horses. Quinn nodded, understanding now why the boy was willing to help them. We're grateful, Thomas. Is there a back way out of here? Thomas led them to a rear door that opened onto a trail leading away from town. This cuts through to the North Road, he explained. It'll bypass the main street where the sheriff has men posted. Quinn mounted Thunder, then gestured for Lillian to emerge from her hiding place. Her eyes widened at the sight of the second horse. Can you ride? Quinn asked as she approached. My father taught me, she confirmed, accepting Thomas's help to mount the mare. Though it's been some time. She's gentle, miss, Thomas assured her. Just give her a firm hand and she'll follow Mr. Vance's stallion without trouble. Quinn reached into his pocket and pulled out several coins, pressing them into Thomas's hand. For your father, for the use of his horse, we'll leave her at the Junction City stables. The boy nodded. Godspeed, Mr. Vance, Miss Hayes. Best hurry, sheriff's organized a search party. With a final nod of thanks, Quinn nudged Thunder forward onto the trail, Lillian close behind on the mare. They kept to a walk until they were well clear of the stables. Then Quinn signaled for a trot once they reached the cover of a small grove of cottonwoods. Junction City is about 3 hours' ride, Quinn called back to Lillian. Can you manage? Yes, she replied, her determination evident despite her obvious discomfort after so long without riding. They rode in silence for the next hour, Quinn frequently checking behind them for signs of pursuit. The desert landscape was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, shadows lengthening as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. When they reached a small creek, Quinn called a halt to rest the horses and allow Lillian a brief respite. She dismounted stiffly, wincing as she stretched her legs. You're doing well, Quinn said, offering her his canteen. Lillian took a grateful sip. I feel terrible about involving Thomas. What if the sheriff punishes him for helping us? The Wilsons seem well respected in town, Quinn reassured her. And the sheriff's pursuit has more to do with Fletcher putting pressure on him than any real legal concern for you. Lillian nodded, though she still looked troubled. I never expected any of this when I tried to steal that medicine for Luke, she said softly. Everything has happened so fast. Quinn checked Thunder's saddle girth, adjusting it slightly. Life changes in an instant sometimes. You make a choice and suddenly nothing is the same. Like when you decided to bid at the auction, Lillian observed, studying him. Quinn paused, meeting her gaze. Yes. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of how their lives had become irrevocably intertwined in the span of just 2 days. Quinn was the first to look away, uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. We should keep moving, he said, helping her remount. I want to reach Junction City before full dark. They continued north, the terrain growing more rugged as they left the flatlands around White Oaks. Quinn set a steady pace, frequently looking back to ensure Lillian was managing. She rode better than he'd expected, her form natural despite her obvious fatigue. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples, Quinn spotted dust in the distance behind them. Riders, he said grimly, at least 3, maybe 4, Lillian's eyes widened in alarm. The sheriff, likely. Quinn studied the approaching dust cloud. They're still a good distance back, but they're pushing their horses hard. What do we do? Quinn considered their options. There's a canyon about half a mile ahead. It narrows to a passage only wide enough for one rider at a time. If we can reach it first, I can hold them off while you continue to Junction City. I'm not leaving you behind, Lillian said firmly. This isn't a debate, Quinn replied. My job is to get you safely away from here. And who decided that was your job? Lillian challenged. You bought my freedom, Quinn Vance, not my obedience. I won't leave you to face them alone. Quinn stared at her, caught between frustration and grudging admiration for her spirit. "Fine," he conceded. "But when we reach the canyon, you follow my lead without question." "Understood," Lillian nodded. "Understood." They urged their mounts to a faster pace, the canyon entrance growing closer as the light faded from the sky. Behind them, the riders were gaining ground, close enough now that Quinn could make out the glint of late sunlight on rifle barrels. The canyon entrance loomed before them, its walls rising sharply on either side of a narrow trail that wound between them. Quinn led them in, following the path as it curved and narrowed. About 50 yards in, he found what he was looking for, a spot where the canyon walls jutted out, creating a natural bottleneck. "Here," he said, raining thunder to a stop. "Dismount and lead your horse around that bend. Stay hidden." This time, Lillian didn't argue. She slipped from the saddle and led the mare deeper into the canyon, disappearing around the curve of stone. Quinn positioned Thunder across the narrow passage, effectively blocking it, and drew his revolver. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed against the canyon walls. Quinn waited, his breathing steady, his hand sure on his weapon. As the first rider rounded the bend into the canyon, Quinn raised his voice. "That's far enough, Sheriff." Sheriff Dunn pulled his horse to a sudden stop, nearly colliding with the riders behind him, 2 deputies and a 4th man Quinn didn't recognize. All 4 had rifles ready. "Vance," the sheriff called, "you're interfering with justice. That woman is a convicted thief." "Her sentence was served when I paid at the auction," Quinn replied evenly. "You have no legal right to pursue her." "This ain't about the woman anymore," Dunn shouted back. "It's about you. You're wanted for questioning regarding the disappearance of Amos Fletcher, so that was their game." Fletcher had fabricated a story to use the law against Quinn. "Fletcher disappeared, did he? Seems unlikely, given he's been hiding at the Thornton Ranch." The sheriff's momentary look of surprise confirmed Quinn's suspicions. Dunn hadn't known Fletcher's whereabouts. He was just following orders, likely with a generous payment involved. "Turn around and ride back to White Oaks, Sheriff," Quinn said firmly. "This doesn't need to get bloody." The 4th rider urged his horse forward slightly, and in the fading light, Quinn finally got a clear look at his face. Not Fletcher, but someone who matched the description of Thornton, Adelaide's son. "You're the one who should turn around, Vance," Thornton called. "Fletcher's offering a hefty sum for you, dead or alive. Seems you've been causing him trouble across 3 territories. And the law is helping him now?" Quinn asked, directing his question to Sheriff Dunn. "Is that what your badge stands for?" He saw uncertainty flicker across the sheriff's face. Dunn was corrupt, certainly, but perhaps not entirely lost to honor. "What about Miss Hayes?" Quinn pressed. "Was selling her at auction justice? Or was that Fletcher's idea too, a way to draw me out when he realized I was in town looking for him?" "That was legitimate," Dunn insisted, though with less conviction. "She broke the law. She tried to save her brother's life," Quinn countered, "and you knew it. Just as you know what you're doing now isn't right." Thornton spat on the ground. "Enough talking, either move aside or we start shooting." Quinn's grip tightened on his revolver. "You fire 1 shot and I guarantee 2 of you won't leave this canyon alive. Is that worth Fletcher's money?" A tense silence fell, broken only by the nervous shifting of horses. Quinn knew he was outnumbered, but he also knew the narrow passage gave him a tactical advantage. They couldn't all fire at once without risking hitting each other. "Sheriff," came a new voice, and Quinn tensed as Lillian stepped into view beside him, ignoring his attempt to wave her back to safety. "Miss Hayes," Dunn acknowledged, looking uncomfortable. "My brother is buried not half a day and you chase me from his grave," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. "Whatever grievance you have with Mr. Vance is separate from my situation. He paid for my freedom legally by your own auction rules." "Miss Hayes, this is bigger than," Dunn began, but Lillian cut him off. "Is it? Or is it simply that Amos Fletcher's money speaks louder than justice?" She took another step forward. "I knew Luke and I had few friends in White Oaks, Sheriff, but I never thought you'd sell your badge so cheaply." Dunn's face flushed, visible even in the deepening twilight. "Now see here, the stage to Santa Fe leaves at dawn from Junction City," Lillian continued. I'll be on it, leaving New Mexico territory for good. Surely that satisfies whatever arrangement you have with Mr. Fletcher. I'll be gone, no longer a concern to anyone in White Oaks. Quinn watched the interplay with growing admiration for Lillian's strategy. She was offering Dunaway to save face, to return to Fletcher with at least partial success. The sheriff hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he lowered his rifle slightly. "And Vance, my business with Fletcher remains unfinished," Quinn stated flatly. "But it doesn't have to involve you, Sheriff," Thornton surged forward. "This is ridiculous. Fletcher's paying us to bring them in." "Fletcher's paying you," Dunn corrected, a new resolve in his voice. "My job is upholding the law, corrupted as I've allowed that to become." He turned to his deputies. "Lower your weapons, boys," Thornton swore violently. "You're making a mistake, Dunn." "Probably not my first," the sheriff acknowledged, "but perhaps my last in Fletcher's service." He looked back at Quinn and Lillian. "You have until dawn. After that, I can't promise what Fletcher might do. He has men beyond my control." Quinn nodded, understanding the sheriff's meaning. "Appreciated." Dunn turned his horse around. "Come on, boys, let's ride back." The deputies followed without question, but Thornton remained, fury evident in every line of his body. "Fletcher won't forget this betrayal," he spat at Dunn. "Neither will I forget my own," Dunn replied wearily. "Now ride, Thornton, or I'll arrest you for threatening an officer of the law." With a final venomous glare at Quinn and Lillian, Thornton wheeled his horse around and followed the sheriff's party out of the canyon. Quinn waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely before holstering his weapon and turning to Lillian. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed," he said, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. Lillian let out a shaky breath, the confidence she'd projected now giving way to trembling relief. "I thought perhaps one lawman to another." I could see he wasn't comfortable with what he was doing. Quinn shook his head in wonder. "You read him perfectly." He helped her back onto her horse. "But Thornton's right about one thing. Fletcher won't let this go easily. We need to reach Junction City and get you on that stage." They rode through the remainder of the canyon in darkness, the moon providing just enough light to navigate safely. Quinn kept Thunder at a walk, the trail too treacherous for speed in such limited visibility. "What will you do after I'm gone?" Lillian asked as they emerged onto the open plain, Junction City visible as distant lights in the valley below. Quinn was silent for a long moment. "Finish what I came to do," he finally replied. "Fletcher needs to answer for his crimes. And then I move on to the next bounty," Quinn said, the familiar emptiness of his existence suddenly striking him as hollow in a way it hadn't before. Lillian rode quietly beside him for several minutes before speaking again. "What if there was another path? One that didn't involve hunting men for money?" Quinn glanced at her, her features soft in the moonlight. "Such as, I don't know," she admitted, "but there must be more to life than vengeance and survival." Her words stirred something in Quinn that he'd long thought dead, a yearning for something beyond the solitary existence he'd carved out for himself after losing his family. But he pushed the feeling aside. Such thoughts were luxuries a man like him couldn't afford. "Junction City's just ahead," he said instead of answering. "We should reach the stables within the hour." The town was quiet when they arrived, most establishments closed for the night except for the saloon and a small inn near the stage coach office. Quinn arranged for Thomas's mare to be cared for and returned to White Oaks when convenient, paying the stable owner generously for the service. "The stage coach office opens at 5, the stable owner informed them. "Stage leaves promptly at 6 for Santa Fe." Quinn secured a room for Lillian at the inn, keeping Thunder with him as he intended to stand watch through the night. Despite the sheriff's apparent change of heart, he didn't trust Thornton not to make another attempt before dawn. "You should rest too," Lillian insisted as they stood outside her room. "You can't stay awake forever." "I've gone longer without sleep," Quinn assured her. "I'll be fine." Lillian studied his face in the dim hallway light. "You've been protecting me since the moment you stepped forward at that auction." "Why?" Quinn looked away, uncomfortable with her directness. "Get some rest, Lillian. Dawn comes early." but she placed a hand on his arm, preventing him from turning away. "Please, I need to understand." Quinn met her gaze, finding himself unable to deflect her question this time. "Because when I saw you standing there, head high despite everything, I remembered what it was to care about something beyond the next bounty, to see injustice and feel compelled to act. And now," she asked softly, "what do you feel now?" The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Quinn was acutely aware of her hand still resting on his arm, of the way her eyes searched his face. "Confusion," he admitted. "In 2 days, you've appended everything I thought I knew about my path." Lillian's expression softened. "Is that so terrible? It's dangerous," Quinn replied. "For both of us." She stepped closer, close enough that he could detect the faint lavender scent that somehow clung to her despite everything they'd been through. "Some dangers are worth facing, Quinn Vance." Before he could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his cheek. "Thank you for my freedom," she whispered. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I won't forget what you did." Then she was gone, slipping into her room and closing the door, leaving Quinn standing in the hallway with his composure thoroughly shaken. He spent the night patrolling between the inn, the stables, and the stage coach office, alert for any sign of Thornton or Fletcher's men. But Junction City remained peaceful, the hours passing slowly as Quinn wrestled with thoughts he'd believed long buried. By the time dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds, Quinn had come to a decision, one that surprised even himself. When Lillian emerged from the inn, dressed in the same black dress but somehow looking refreshed and resolute, he was waiting with Thunder saddled and ready. "The stage office is open," he informed her. "I've purchased your ticket to Santa Fe." Lillian nodded, though her eyes held a question she didn't voice. They walked together to the stage coach office, where the driver was already loading luggage and mail bags onto the roof of the coach. "Santa Fe is 3 days' journey," Quinn explained as they waited. "From there, you could head east to St. Louis or west to California. I've included enough money for either journey." "That's very generous," Lillian said quietly. "You deserve a fresh start," Quinn replied. "A chance to build something new, free from the shadows of white oaks." The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Other travelers began to climb inside, a mixture of businessmen, a schoolteacher, and an elderly couple. Lillian turned to face Quinn fully. "And what about you? Will you return to White Oaks, to Fletcher?" Quinn nodded. "I have to finish what I started, and after." There was an intensity in her question that made Quinn's heart beat faster. "After," he said slowly, "I was thinking I might visit Santa Fe. I hear it's lovely this time of year." Lillian's eyes widened with understanding, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "Is that so?" "If you'd be amenable to a visit," Quinn added, suddenly uncertain. "I think," Lillian said carefully, "that I would be very amenable indeed." The driver called the final boarding, and Lillian knew she had to go. But before she turned away, she reached up and placed her hand against Quinn's cheek. "Finish your business with Fletcher," she said softly. "But remember, there's something waiting beyond vengeance now." Quinn covered her hand with his own. "I'll remember." With a final look that held more promise than any words could convey, Lillian boarded the stagecoach. As it pulled away from Junction City in a cloud of dust, Quinn stood watching until it disappeared from sight, Thunder patient beside him. For the first time in 5 years, Quinn Vance felt something that had been absent from his life since losing his family hope. It was a fragile thing, this new beginning, but as he mounted Thunder and turned back toward White Oaks, he found himself looking forward rather than back. Amos Fletcher still awaited him, one last piece of business to conclude. But beyond that lay Santa Fe and Lillian, and possibilities he'd never thought to have again. It was a future worth fighting for, worth living for. As Quinn rode south, the rising sun at his back, he recognized that his impulsive decision at the auction 2 days ago had changed everything. In buying Lillian's freedom, he had somehow found his own. 3 weeks later, Quinn Vance stepped off the stagecoach in Santa Fe, his bounty on Fletcher collected and his resignation from the bounty hunter's life tendered to the marshal's office. He stood for a moment, taking in the bustling plaza, the blend of Spanish and American architecture creating a town unlike any he'd seen before. Lillian was waiting for him, just as she'd promised in her last letter. She stood on the boardwalk outside a small cafe, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, her hair styled neatly beneath a modest hat. When she spotted him, her face lit with a smile that made the long journey instantly worthwhile. "You came," she said simply as he approached. Quinn set down his travel bag and removed his hat. "I said I would." "And Fletcher, facing justice in Mesilla," Quinn confirmed. "He won't harm anyone else." Lillian nodded, satisfaction in her expression. "And you, are you truly finished with that life?" Quinn took her hand, feeling the rightness of it in his own. "I am. It's time for something new." As they walked together through the streets of Santa Fe, Quinn felt the weight of his past beginning to lighten. There would be challenges ahead. They were still virtual strangers in many ways, both carrying scars from their pasts. But there was also possibility and hope, and a chance to build something neither had thought to find in the harsh landscape of the New Mexico territory. "I found work at a dressmaker's shop," Lillian told him as they strolled, "and rooms in a respectable boarding house. I've been considering the marshal's offer," Quinn shared. "He needs deputies who know the territory. It would be using my skills for the right reasons this time." Lillian squeezed his hand. "I think that would suit you." In the months that followed, they built their new lives carefully, step by step. Quinn took the deputy marshal's position, finding satisfaction in upholding the law rather than merely hunting its breakers. Lillian's skill with a needle impressed her employer enough that she was soon designing dresses as well as sewing them. They courted properly, with chaperoned walks and Sunday dinners, building a relationship founded on more than the intense circumstances that had brought them together. Quinn learned that Lillian loved poetry and could recite Tennyson from memory. She discovered his unexpected talent for whittling, the small wooden animals he created revealing a gentleness his bounty hunter persona had concealed. When Quinn proposed 6 months after arriving in Santa Fe, it was on a hilltop overlooking the town, the mountains painted gold by the setting sun. Lillian's yes was immediate and certain, her eyes bright with happy tears as he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. They were married in the spring of 1879, a small ceremony attended by new friends and a few surprising faces. Thomas Wilson had ridden all the way from White Oaks to see them wed, bringing news that his grandmother Martha sent her blessings. Even more unexpected was the presence of Sheriff Dunn, now former sheriff, who had left White Oaks shortly after Quinn's departure and found honest work ranching near Santa Fe. "Couldn't live with myself after everything with Fletcher," he admitted to Quinn at the reception. "Figured it was time for a change, same as you." Their first home was a small adobe house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, close enough for their work in town but with room for a garden and perhaps someday children. Quinn planted cottonwoods along the property line, promising Lillian they would provide shade in the summers to come, a promise of permanence neither had expected to have again. Life wasn't always easy. Quinn sometimes woke in the night, haunted by memories of his first wife and daughter, of the men he'd hunted, of violence witnessed and dealt. But Lillian was always there, her quiet strength a balm to his troubled soul. And when Lillian's own demons visited nightmares of the auction block or her brother's death, Quinn held her until the terror subsided. Together, they built something neither had thought possible in those dark days in White Oaks, a life filled with purpose and love, rooted in the understanding that sometimes freedom comes in unexpected forms, and redemption can begin with a single, selfless act. When their daughter was born a year after their marriage, they named her Hope, a testament to what they had found in each other against all odds. And as they stood together watching the sunset from their porch, their child sleeping peacefully inside, Quinn reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led him to that auction in White Oaks. "Any regrets?" Lillian asked, seeming to sense his thoughts as she often did. Quinn drew her closer, his arm around her waist. Not one, he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. In the distance, a stagecoach rattled along the Santa Fe Trail, carrying passengers to new beginnings just as it had carried Lillian 2 years before. Quinn watched it disappear over the horizon, grateful beyond words that his own journey had led him here, to this moment, to this woman who had shown him that even in the wild and often cruel territory of the West, love could take root and flourish. And it had all begun with a simple, wordless act of defiance against injustice, a moment when a bounty hunter remembered what it meant to be a man of honor, and a woman facing servitude dared to hope for freedom. The auction that had been meant to sell Lillian into bondage had instead set them both free, opening a path neither could have imagined that dusty afternoon in White Oaks. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Quinn Vance held his wife close and gave silent thanks for second chances, for unexpected journeys, and for the courage to begin again.